Okay, so let's talk about non-random mating and how sortative mating, inbreeding, and outbreeding can affect the phenotypes and genotypes specifically, and how that can affect Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium in general. So remember, we're still in that area or that zone. We're talking about mechanisms that alter existing genetic variation. And in terms of random mating, random mating was one of the conditions that are required to establish Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So in this case, your choice of mate is made regardless of the genotypes or phenotypes. So you can think about this condition and how often this is violated. So I'll give you 2 seconds. Yes, this is pretty frequently violated. And I put up my 2 cats in here, and although they're both boys, they won't be mating. But for example, random mating would be that these two would get together simply without any concern about their color or their length of their whiskers or anything else about them or their size. So random. You can also think about it in terms of humans. Let's say that you turn all the lights off in an area and you've got a group of people in there, turn all the lights off, and you set a rule and you say, okay, the first person you bump into is the one that you mate with. That would be random. As you're moving around, you think of Brownian motion, you kind of hit somebody, then you mate with them. That would be random mating. Now, non-random mating, on the other hand, is where you're actually choosing your mate based on certain characteristics. So this is also referred to as assortative mating, right? So that's just a fancy word. And there's multiple ways that you can do this. Like genotypes or not like genotypes. It depends. We tend to choose our mates based on phenotypes, right? That's kind of a general pattern. Now, you can also think about the impact that mating has on the phenotypes. And the classic assorted types of, or examples of assortative mating that we know of are inbreeding and outbreeding. So in inbreeding, that is simply what everybody recognizes, mating between genetically related individuals. Outbreeding would be always mating with individuals that are not genetically related. Now, in the absence of any other evolutionary force, in the absence of natural selection, of mutation, of genetic drift, and also migration, the allele frequencies are not going to be affected by inbreeding and outbreeding. What's actually affected or disrupted are genotype frequencies. So that's where we get some problems, or differences, if you will. Now, there can be positive aspects of inbreeding. So, for example, in agriculture, this is done constantly. And although this looks pretty daggone freaky, this would be an animal that's bred for a certain trait. So you keep inbreeding lines. And the result is that you get a higher proportion of homozygotes in that breeding pool or gene pool than you would if you weren't actually selecting for a certain trait. So the outcome of this, in terms of inbreeding, is that you can actually increase homozygosity, and that could be either the homozygous dominance or the homozygous recessive. It depends on what trait you're trying to select for. Or you can actually, as a consequence of increasing homozygosity, you decrease heterozygosity. This is basically, SITY, heterozygosity is really just the proportion or percentage of heterozygotes that you would expect in the population based on any given allele frequency, just like homozygosity is. So this is 2pq, this would be p squared and q squared in terms of the homozygosity. Now, inbreeding can also have negative effects. There are many genetic or diseases that are actually inherited in a recessive manner. Albinism is one of them. You see this in these wild populations of animals. We also see this in inbred human populations. This can be very detrimental for wild populations because these kind of stand out, don't they? So they tend to get picked off pretty quickly by predators. Now, again, this is albinism is inherited in a recessive manner, or is a recessive trait. So we're seeing the consequences of increasing the individuals, or the likelihood of being a homozygote, and therefore increasing homozygosity in these populations via inbreeding. So outbreeding could actually tend to increase heterozygosity, or in that sense, you're potentially increasing the possibility for different alleles in the population.